The Dante Moore guy at UCLA, I'm really interested to see. I think he had some arm stuff in the spring, but apparently is bouncing back there. He's from up your way. I thought one of the more polished quarterbacks that we've seen come out in a while. He's played a ton of reps. I don't think the adjustment to the college game for him, if he wins the job there at UCLA, will be an enormous adjustment.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Bud Elliott on the show. He is a college football betting expert, and he also works for CBS Sports and 247 Sports. Among other topics in this episode, we talk about Bud's process for getting ready for the college football season, and that includes his use of recruiting to really tell which players could make an impact, and also coordinator changes. He also tells us about how he most efficiently uses his time for games that he can't catch every Saturday. And along the way, we talk about teams such as UCLA, Florida State, and Clemson. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. Every Saturday, I send out my curated list of sports betting tips and analytics. In addition, I'll be sending a lot of my preview content for the 2023 football season in August. To sign up for this free service, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information based on data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Bud Elliott. He is a college football betting expert. He also works for CBS, 247 Sports, and is a co-host of the really awesome Cover 3 college football podcast. Bud, welcome to the show.
Yeah, good to be back, man.
Absolutely. Bud, you put in so much work into college football. You've talked about how you do it 365 days of the year. Kind of give me a sense for kind of your year-long process and how you get ready for every single season.
Sure. So I kind of depends on when you want to start in the calendar, but I think if you basically start in like late December, I'm tracking who teams sign in the recruiting space. I'm tracking best I can tell what their goals are in the transfer portal, so that I can evaluate, what they thought of their team at the end of the year against what they brought in the transfer portal. And then, I'm out there at the recruiting camp, seeing these guys in person, trying to visit schools and check out what they're doing as well. And then tracking all this roster movement in the off season, reading as absolutely much as I can, listening to some podcasts. Obviously yours is awesome. I chat with a bunch of my friends who like college football really throughout the year. Hey, did you guys see this? What do you think about this? And, just kind of trying to take in as much information as I can and balance all those factors into making a number.
Awesome. Hey, I appreciate the kind words about the podcast, but I really actually want to dig in a little bit about the recruiting aspect. Obviously people that have models, people like Bill Connolly, they account for that stuff. But when I first met you, I think roughly 2016, 2017, one of the first things you told me was how good Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields were, that quarterback class. So I feel like it's above just, I think a lot of people kind of use recruiting rankings, but like you're going to these camps and you're watching these guys throw. I mean, you're getting like on the ground information. So give us a sense for that and I guess how it meshes with your work at 247, which is a recruiting service.
Sure. So yeah, I really do think that there's value in being there in person at these recruiting camps. And I don't necessarily have to go. I guess I could choose not to go, but I think that it informs my college football coverage on Cover 3 and the work I do for CBS to have seen these guys in person. I had seen Trevor and Justin in person, and I'm not the only guy that had, but plenty of dudes in the recruiting space had. I don't think a lot of guys in the college football coverage space had. And to me, like I think that is sort of a kind of a unique flavor of my college football recruiting and betting coverage is that you go out and see these guys in person, right? And be like, okay, yes, not all number one players in the country are created equal. And it was very clear to me, like Justin and Trevor would have been the number one player in the country, both of them in many of the prior years. And they turned out to be just absolute studs, right? I mean, Trevor, obviously, just in some years, like, okay, the number one quarterback this year is, I guess, Spencer Rattler, who's toolsy, but clearly like not anywhere near as proven to me as like a Trevor or Justin. Trevor or Justin that year, what really kind of brought it home for me was they were not massively behind in terms of physical tools the college counselors who come back and volunteer for some of these camps. I was like, oh, this is a great comparison point. You got guys that have been in college for 2 or 3 years, and Trevor and Justin are physically like right there with them, So understanding which 5 stars are more longer term upside projections and which are probably closer to being instant impact guys is certainly a value of diving into the recruiting more so than just incorporating a recruiting number into your model.
Absolutely. Was JT Daniels part of that class too, or am I getting that wrong?
He had reclassed, so he was kind of late in there. And now he's at Rice. I guess we'll see how he does.
Oh my God, is he at Rice?
Yeah. He left West Virginia and now he's at Rice. And then Rice has
Go Owls. Let's go.
Rice has since lost one of their better receivers, Rosner, to a grad transfer to NC State, who's now with Brennan Armstrong, who is now at NC State from Virginia. So, the transfer portal has turned this thing upside down like in the last 2 years. This is so different than what it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So give us a sense, Bud, maybe for like a quarterback. I mean, let's not just restrict it to quarterbacks. Are there any players out there that have not hit the college football field yet that you think could have an impact this season based on what you've seen in these recruiting circles?
Sure. So let's just go. I do think we can do quarterback this year. Not all years, but to me, the quarterback class last year was really pretty special. You had a lot of guys who I feel like, your 4th, 5th, 6th guys in last year's quarterback class, I believe would have been maybe your 1, 2, 3, 4 in some of the prior years, right? So you look at this, like Nico, who signed with Tennessee, is just a complete physical freak and apparently one of the better men's volleyball youth players out there too. The body control, you see him just dominate in some of the volleyball clips, and I think you see that too when he makes some of the off-platform throws, right? It kind of stands to reason if you're really good, playing off your feet in volleyball, your ability to throw when you don't have perfect balance, it should show up. The Dante Moore guy at UCLA, I'm really interested to see. I think he had some arm stuff in the spring, but apparently is bouncing back there. He's from up your way. I thought one of the more polished quarterbacks that we've seen come out in a while. He's played a ton of reps. I don't think the adjustment to the college game for him, if he wins the job there at UCLA, will be an enormous adjustment. And I had talked to Trent Dilfer about him, who's now the UAB coach, and he used to run the on-field stuff for the Elite 11, and he just loved how repeatable the kid's motion was, right? And just didn't think there was a lot of work that needed to be done there. I know some of the guys on that Elite 11 staff thought he was kind of the closest thing to Bryce that they had seen in the last couple of years. And then Jackson Arnold, right, who signed with Oklahoma. To me, he's a little more college-y, but yet this archetype of player is now being seen a little more in the NFL. Like he's not 6'3", 6'1", a little thicker, but a very good athlete, big time arm, extremely productive at a very high level of Texas football. So a couple guys who are really, really proven. Nico tools wise is I think really different. And then Arch Manning, obviously, who is a tremendous combination of basically all of those. And people are like, oh, he's not a special athlete and stuff. I'm like, well, some of the dunking stuff's pretty good. And if you've seen the recent pictures of him, he looks like he's pretty jacked. And Georgia waited on him, and so did a lot of other top schools too. So to me, there's some signal in what the best schools do as far as, hey, do they wait for a kid before they move on to their next target? And a number of top schools waited on Arch Manning. So I do think that this is a very strong freshman quarterback class.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Each of the four guys that you mentioned is not slated to start the season. And in fact, Bill Collin and I talked about Joe Milton for the Heisman, with the idea that he could be fantastic with the arm strength, arm talent that he has, but he could also be on the bench week 5, right?
So I live in Orlando, and Milton is just such an interesting guy to me. But back when I worked for SB Nation, we didn't have a deal with Huddle, right, for highlights. So I basically shot, I don't know, 90% of the highlights that we had on our network for recruiting. And I saw Milton a lot because he's from Orlando as well. And he's the only guy I've ever kept a side folder of the misses, because they were so just absolute WTF, right? The upside was ridiculous. Like I've been at IMG Academy down there in Bradenton for 7-on, where he's throwing next to Cam Newton. I'm like, okay, obviously Cam Newton is Cam Newton, but there's not a whole lot of high schoolers who you even put in that classification as far as, arm and size. And then he's like doing a standing backflip, and then he throws just absolute lasers that these high school kids can't catch. And then he also literally on something that he could have like hit it with his knee and gave it to the receiver or underhanded it. Right. Throws a rocket from like 2.5 yards away to the wrong shoulder of the kid. It hits the kid's back shoulder, goes up in the air, and gets picked off for a touchback to lose the 7-on game. So, I mean, I totally see why he has won the starting job. I guess to be the third time, right? Because he started at Michigan. Yeah. Because the tools are that tantalizing. I don't think I've ever seen a high school kid with a stronger arm. But also, there's a reason that he's been benched twice. So,
yeah, I think
we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, some of what you were describing of Milton kind of reminds me of Josh Allen in his last year at Wyoming. Yeah. There's obviously precedent for improvement in these young players. And, we'll see what happens with Milton, but he's going to get that opportunity this year. It's an explosive offense. We'll get into a little Heisman talk later, but yeah.
Oh, if you want one more quarterback, by the way.
Yes, please.
I do think that Jonathan Smith at Oregon State got an absolute steal at Aiden Childs. Okay. And I think Aiden Childs would be like a top 3 or 4 quarterback this year or in 2022. And he was, seventh for us, and on the 24/7 Sports Composite, which is the industry average, 12th. And I strongly think he's better than that.
Excellent. And these are the kind of insights, right? Like, let's say Caleb Williams gets dinged up, right? You're not gonna maybe downgrade USC as much as maybe the markets might, because you're interested in seeing what Dante Moore does, right? That's
or Malachi. Yeah. Right. I mean, at USC, like Malachi is a really, really accomplished passer and a guy I feel like we have a high level of confidence in.
Yeah. Awesome. So, but let's also talk a little bit about roster management. You talked about the transfer portal, how it's a little bit crazy. Are you doing that quantitatively, or are you just kind of just getting information more qualitatively and working that into your opinion of these teams?
I am doing it quantitatively, but then I am trying to tweak it based on the input that I get about the players, right? Like, so I think you have to do both if you want to really get an edge. Because everybody, if you don't do it quantitatively, I just don't know how you manage it all. But I don't know how you get an edge if you're purely quantitative. Because I think at this point, anybody who's doing this seriously needs to, like, they're all doing that, right? Like they're all incorporating the returning production in some way, the stats from the prior year in some way, right? I think they're starting to probably incorporate the player's transfer rating in a quantitative way, but I still think that there's information that can help you get an edge in this.
For sure. Who's tracking this player transfer rating?
So 24/7 Sports does transfer re-ratings. I know. I think Rivals does. I think On3 does. So all the major recruiting services, at least, I think, try to re-rank some of the transfers. But also, we don't know. I will say at 24/7 Sports, we have multiple guys whose job is to do this. So I don't know what the other networks are doing as far as their investment in the portal. And yet I still don't know how accurate the transfer ratings will be, because I have a decent feel for how often 5 stars hit and 4 stars hit, right? Out of the high school ranks. But I don't know what that will look like, because we don't have enough data yet. We only really have 2 full years of this portal stuff.
Right. And just sparse data beyond that, right? So, I mean, you're talking about stuff like a guy moving from FCS to Power 5. How is that going to translate, right?
100%. One thing that I do, and I don't mind saying this because I think it's kind of common sense, but maybe not everybody thinks this way. I think if you go get a player that you've previously coached, I don't know if I believe that makes his ceiling more likely to hit, but I do think that I believe in that player's floor more if that coach is going to get a guy he previously had. You know, not everything will turn out like Penix at Washington, but I would have been pretty surprised if DeBoer, who's a very good coach and his track record of offense is awesome, if Penix just sucked for him, right? Because like you've already coached the guy in person. It's not a guess on a high school kid.
Right. And I thought Michael Penix was just outstanding at Indiana before he dealt with injuries like that last year.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Since the first time I saw that guy throw with his left arm, like I thought he was great. Obviously didn't work out there. Well, I mean, it did work out, right? I mean, Indiana is in much worse shape than they were when he was there.
Far worse.
Yeah, excellent. But there's another thing that you have mentioned in your college football betting, and that is looking at coordinators and how they change a pace of play. Maybe describe that real quick, and then whether there's any coordinator changes that you're looking at for the first couple of games to look at totals for the 2023 season.
Sure. So I mean, look, you can get your offensive rating and your defensive rating correct, and your overall power rating correct. But how many drives you have, how many plays you play is pretty vitally important, right? And I do think that there are a number of teams each year who will play a different pace. One of the ones I'm curious to see here is Miami with Shannon Dawson, who came over from Houston. And I think this has a large impact on totals, but also I do think you need to use pace a little bit in your sides. I don't think you can just go straight power rating, or maybe you think you can. It just depends on whether you're pacing into your power rating, which is kind of everybody's own decision to make. So Miami, Shannon Dawson at times, Houston at times has operated with tempo. Cristobal, traditionally, his coordinators do not operate with tempo. And, I was at ACC Media Day and I asked multiple guys, and they were kind of like, we're going to go fast and slow. We're going to go fast, but huddle. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Like, are you guys, I assume you're a little faster than last year, because last year is just incompetent on offense. And they, maybe you saw that coming with the Josh Gaddis experience. I wasn't sure what to make of that. So that's an interesting one to watch for sure. NC State's one to watch at times. Syracuse and Virginia, when they've run this sort of the new offense under Robert and are they going to go fast at NC State now, like they did at times there at Virginia? But they didn't always go fast. North Carolina is a fascinating one to watch. They lose a dude who is pace, just like Wisconsin's like a pretty obvious pace team now with Phil Longo. I don't think you hire Longo and then ask him to slow down. But how will North Carolina run this year? Last year, they definitely had some pace to them. And with the new coordinator who they got from UCF, we're going to have to see how that works. Like, there's a lot of teams to track early on to see what they will be operating at as far as pace. Trying to think if there's a true, like last year, Western Kentucky is probably the best example of this, right? When they went from a very slow operation, this is 2 years ago, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Ed. I know you know which one I'm talking about. When they got Kitley from Houston Baptist, right. It was like, even if you adjusted for all the Houston Baptist guys they brought in to Western, if you didn't get the pace right, you were still massively undershooting this.
That was the Bailey Zappi year 2 years ago.
Yeah,
or was there one before that?
No, it was Zappi, because they imported the OC Zach Kitley, who's now at Texas Tech, and basically the whole Houston Baptist offense with him, which again, I mean, this is kind of all the things we're hitting on, right? Transfer portal, pace.
Yep.
It's
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I think there was a pace thing with Western Kentucky 2 years ago, but there was also an efficiency thing. Like, I was just kind of shocked that they were like top 5, I think, when I was looking at adjusted success rate. And usually the adjustments really pull down a team like Western Kentucky. Not so with that team. And I'm pretty sure they continue that straight through the year.
They definitely, yeah. No, I agree. I do think you needed to get both, but yeah, like they wasn't just pace. They were immediately very good. Although in the first game that I remember, was it an FCS game? I'm trying to think who they played in the first one, but the total was like in like I think the high 40s to start. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like they're gonna. I thought they were gonna score like 50 or 60 on their own, and it kind of started slow, and then it blew over eventually, which was nice.
Awesome. So it sounds like you talked about Miami, North Carolina State, UNC. It sounds like these are coordinators to watch, not necessarily slam dunk changes in pace that you're auto betting overs or unders early.
Yeah, I think there are fewer auto bets this year. There are more where I'm like, okay, they're talking a good game. I'll sort of believe it, when I see it. For instance, I mean, Colorado State last year did not go fast. Traditionally, Norvell's a guy who will go a little faster. If they're better on offense, it'd be hard to be worse. Then it kind of stands to reason they may operate with more pace. I think there's fewer this year, Ed, that are like slam dunk pace. But maybe I think there are less. In previous years, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a no doubt like new pace. They're definitely running this type thing.
Right.
Oh, Colorado's an obvious one that we should mention, and that's again plays into the whole transfer thing. But I don't think you hire Sean Lewis from Kent State, who runs the veer and shoot stuff, and not let him operate.
Okay, so a faster pace there.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, they traditionally run like a crazy tempo. Colorado was very slow last year for the most part, so I think that's a pretty obvious pace increase team.
Right, but that's also, I mean, there's so much going on there, right?
Right,
you're bringing
yeah.
in an FCS quarterback who's been good, coach's son, and I don't know. Actually, maybe some quick thoughts on Colorado, 50 transfers, where you think they'll end up, how good they are.
So I think that in some ways there was a little bit of throwing the baby out with the bathwater with who Dion asked to leave, because some of the guys who are gone off that team are projected to start for teams that are better than Colorado.
Right.
However, I mean, look, you have 1 year when you take over a football team to basically cut kids, essentially, that the NCAA will let you do, and he's taking full advantage of that rule. I think the starters they got are probably big upgrades over what they had at most positions. I am skeptical about the quality of depth that they were able to assemble via the portal. It's a hard sell when you come in there and you say, hey, my son Shedeur Sanders is the starting quarterback, even though he wasn't, I think, even on the roster at the time. How do you go and recruit a transfer player to that to be a backup, right? I mean, like you only get one free transfer. The next one, you technically have to sit out a year unless you get a waiver. Do you think that you're going to want to sign up for that? Here's another one for you on this. If they're playing this crazy pace, they're going to have to get into that depth some, even without injuries, just from pure fatigue and at altitude, right? So how good is this depth? I think is an important question we need to be asking on Colorado this year. I don't know. I have my doubts as to whether the depth is actually good.
Right. Colorado is going to be one of these teams that you're going to be, kind of keeping track of early in the season. You were on the Bet Bash college football betting panel, did an excellent job. And one of the most interesting things I heard on the panel was that, you don't have time to watch every single game, but what you do every week is you go back and watch turnovers and explosive plays. Why?
Well, I try to watch as much college football as I can, but I just I respect everybody on the panel, but a lot of them are like I watch every single snap, and I'm like, okay. The focus of the panel though was betting openers and betting early in the week. I definitely have no idea how we can watch every single game in a 24-hour period, So to me, if you can find numbers that kind of give you a feel for how the game goes on a down-to-down basis, then what's the best use of your time as far as watching? So if I get a feel for how the game played out for the most part, then I want to see what the turnovers and explosive plays look like. Were they more deserved, earned, whatever the term you want to use there, or was there more of a luck factor? Right? Did the quarterback just drop the ball? Did a defensive back fall down, or did your guy make a great play? Those type of things, right? Like special teams turnovers, right? Did a punt hit did a punt hit a guy and basically be an inadvertent touch that created a turnover. So for me, I think within the very short turnaround window, that's the best use of my time to get a feel for the plays that really swung the game, and then I'll rely on the stats to kind of box score scout most of it.
For sure, and I love the insight, because when you run numbers and you look at what's predictive, there's not a lot of predictability in turnovers and explosive plays. But obviously that's not true in every single situation, right? So maybe give us a sense, like, especially for the explosive plays, right? I would guess that you think there's a difference if a play went for 80 yards because a backup cornerback missed a tackle, as opposed to the offense taking advantage of a matchup, right?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, did they blow a coverage? Did the guy just beat a guy one-on-one? Depending on your thoughts, like, is that something that can be exploited again? Was a turnover created because they had great pressure? Are they hitting explosive plays repeatedly because there's no pressure on the quarterback? And if so, like, what does that tell me about the pass rush of the opposing team? Which, again, some of that will be captured in the stats. But like, when I want to get a feel for, okay, how did this game end up like this? I do feel like stats for most of it, explosive plays, turnovers, as far as viewing experience, can tell me most of the story that I need. And I do try to go back and watch most of the snaps throughout the week, but that's still really hard to do unless you're if you're with a group and you have like 7 guys, I'm sure you could split it up and get it done pretty fast. But I don't have that. So I think that's the most efficient use of my time.
For sure. And Eddie Walls on that panel talked about how much football he watches. I don't know if that guy's human in terms of the amount of information that he can absorb about those kinds of things. I do think there's a lot of value in kind of, being smart with your time in terms of what you watch, right?
No doubt about it.
I thought that was a great insight. Is there an example from last season where, because you were watching turnovers, explosive plays, that you either made a bet or got yourself off a bet?
Okay, so made a bet or got myself off a bet,
or maybe even just an insight on a team.
Well, let's think about. I mean, the Texas A&M Arkansas game, right? Texas A&M or Arkansas is mostly controlling the ball game, and then they go in to score. KJ Jefferson goes to reach the ball over the goal line. He's a 6'4", 240-pound quarterback, tries to dive in and gets the ball swatted, and A&M returns it 98 yards for a touchdown, right? Like that's one, like, okay, that is a big outlier event right there that swung the game. But if they play that game again, like, I'm going to take Arkansas again. That wasn't really a pressure thing. It was just more fluky. And obviously the return part is almost always, I mean, there's some skill, certainly. Like, better athletes are going to have a better time returning, turnovers for touchdowns in the open field. But I feel like there's a lot of randomness in that too, right? Like, basically how many guys are around you when you recover the ball is pretty interesting.
For sure. And especially on the fumble returns, the ball has to kind of pop up in a convenient way for the defense to return it, right? And that's a source of a lot of randomness.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. But is there a week 0 or week 1 bet, or maybe a win total, or any type of bet that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah. So I think there's still some of this out there. I've played some long shots. I took some UCLA at 40 to make the playoff, which I know sounds crazy, but I mean, if you go through their schedule, I don't know how you do your numbers, Ed, but like, if UCLA plays at its like absolute ceiling, which entails staying healthy, the schedule sets up fairly well for them, right? I mean, at Utah is always a daunting game, but given the reports on Cam Rising's health, I mean, he might play against Florida, he might not. I'm not sure yet. I know he's back throwing, and they're saying he's doing a little more at practice each day from what I've been able to read. But I think I would still rather play Utah early rather than late based on Kyle Whittingham's history, if you buy into that kind of stuff. At Oregon State is a difficult game. You get at USC, which is technically a road game, but I don't know how much home field you're giving USC for that in-town game, right? It's not like a 90-10 crowd, I would say there. And certainly if you're a good team in UCLA, like if you're a team that bet I made is not totally dead, then you're not going to have an enormous crowd advantage for USC because UCLA fans and the bandwagon will show out. I mean, at Stanford, at Arizona are some of the easier road trips you can make in that league. So I thought that was something worth playing. I played some Colorado State for the Mountain West at 40-1, and then I played some Oklahoma State for the Big 12 at 60-1. Both of those are essentially some positive regression and then path as well, which just some long shot stuff that I've hit so far. I did have a pretty good number of win totals. I think I sent out 20. I have a little email list that I send stuff out to in the preseason, and I think 19 of 20 moved in my direction. So from that standpoint, I was happy with the moves on that, and I usually have pretty max confidence that my win total stuff will win. I mean, it's throughout the it's throughout the off season, but
so yeah, you talked about UCLA 40-1 to make the college football playoff. What are you seeing with Chip Kelly's team that you like, that maybe they're better than what people expect?
Yeah, so I think that they have some real questions, but this is a team that I feel scouts the transfer portal well, and I like Carson Steele, who if your guy watches any MAC ball, I thought he was a pretty efficient runner at Ball State. J. Michael Sturdivant from Cal is a really explosive weapon for them on the outside, and to me that was an important question that they had to answer when they lost Jake Bobo to the NFL. Charbonnet, again, a really good running back they lost, but I like the job they did in getting Carson Steele from Ball State. I feel like they'll be better potentially at the tight end position as well this year. Defensive line, I think they got a pretty nice front seven, Ed. Honestly, Jay Toya, I liked. I think Gary Smith's a good player. They got this guy from Cal who will be interesting to see how well he comes on throughout the season. But UCLA basically said that they didn't really need to scout the guy. They just watched him make 17 tackles against them in the final game of the year. And they're like, oh, yeah.
Right.
This guy's in the portal. We just played him 2 weeks ago. That's awful convenient. With them, offensive line health is going to be the real key. A bet on UCLA to make the playoff is a bet on the offensive line staying healthy, because I don't know about their depth there, but I think the starters are quality enough, and they don't face a ton of great defensive lines on this schedule. Utah, right. Oregon State, okay. USC, maybe. I think they'll be improved.
Right.
Yeah. So if the offensive line stays healthy, I'm fairly confident Chip's going to score points, and I think UCLA has a pretty quality front seven.
Chip Kelly came back to college football, kind of didn't really do the things that he was doing before at Oregon or even in the NFL. I think that team got better because Dorian Thompson-Robinson got better over the last couple years, right? But is there some sense in which Chip Kelly's working on that next innovation? I mean, is it the transfer portal or I think I heard something about player health or sports science, player science? What's he up to?
Yeah, that was some stuff that people were talking about quite a bit. With the player sleep and then the training table cost they had was through the roof. I guess they were eating pretty good over there in Westwood. So yeah, I think the guy still knows what he's doing offensively. They weren't doing the same stuff, but I still thought that was a very good offense last year, and DTR certainly was a major part of that. But I do think that Chip can scheme it up pretty good still. I think the guy's a good coach.
I find it funny that he thinks he's going to get 18 to 22-year-old boys to sleep more. But is that something that's going to happen?
I mean, is there actually value to tracking the fact that they don't sleep? I don't know. It's like, cool. We have this data. Can we change the behavior? No. All right. What do we do with this?
I mean, I honestly believe if you could get your entire football team to sleep 9 hours a night, which is probably what they need with the wear and tear on their bodies, that would be a massive, massive edge in college football. I just
100%.
I just don't know how to accomplish that, right?
Totally.
But you are a Florida State expert. You've been following this team for a long time. You were on the Nolecast podcast. Florida State is a team that seems to be on the rise recently. Maybe give us a sense for how they got out of their funk post Jimbo Fisher and what we can expect in 2023.
Yeah, so I thought the administration had good patience with Mike Norvell. The first year that he took the job was COVID, so just kind of some crazy stuff during that season, and even the following year they lost an FCS game and they started out 0-4, right? So, and since then the turnaround has been pretty substantial. They have done a really good job for 2 years running in the transfer portal, upgrading their roster, but also Norvell will talk about this publicly, how their culture, they had to be pretty careful about who they brought in culturally, and that like a lot of the best culture kids on their team were or are from the transfer portal. And then like they're very happy about how that went. I think there's some signal to the quality of player who left this team and are now starting for other teams because they got beat out or would have been beat out. So Micah Pittman is probably going to start at receiver for Utah. I think that's in part because Florida State has some young guys who are coming up, and they've also done a nice job in the portal at the receiver position. Getting Keon, I mean, you live in Michigan. Keon Coleman is pretty freaky. Apparently, he windmill dunked in jeans and loafers at Norvell's house, which, I mean, granted, like he played on Michigan State's basketball team, but that's a really good combo to have on the outside with Coleman and Wilson. Trayshawn Ward was an extremely productive back for them, but Trey Benson, their now starter, is 3 years now off that serious knee injury he suffered coming out of high school, and they're extremely pleased with his progress. I think Trayshawn Ward saw the writing on the wall and transferred to Kansas State. So if you're projecting this team, I do think you need to read into the fact that guys who are now starters for contenders to win other Power 5 leagues got beat out or were getting beat out before they hit the portal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense, right?
I mean, like Michigan, right? I mean, like the safety who went to the Gators from Michigan was not going to start for Michigan, right? Like that probably tells me something about Michigan's defense.
For sure. Let's hope so.
Moten, right? I think.
RJ
Moten.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think he played a lot of snaps last year, if I'm not mistaken.
But like, I mean, why do you transfer to Florida if you're if you weren't going to get beat out by somebody on a team that made the cultural playoff 2 years in a row? So like, I think you got to have a lot of confidence that Michigan secondary is taking yet another step up.
Yeah, we're certainly going to hope so. I think Will Johnson is going to be great. I think they got that transfer in. I mean, the second cornerback position was always going to be the question mark there, but I think the kid from UMass is going to be that guy. How do you project Florida State this season? I mean, obviously it's pretty hard with the neutral site game to open up against LSU. But what are your expectations as an insider?
Yeah, I think that it would be a disappointment if they don't at least make the ACC title game. I think Clemson is an improved football team as well. I do think Garrett Riley is an upgrade as an offensive coach, and Cade Klubnik had some good moments last year and was a freshman. So they seem to be pretty all in on him. So I don't think it's a crazy disappointment if you don't win the league. I think if you don't make the title game within the ACC, it's a disappointment. That at their ceiling, I could definitely see Florida State making the playoff, but that would require a lot of guys playing to their absolute best, and Jordan Travis, the quarterback, probably taking yet another step. But I do think it's an extremely veteran football team, and there are not a whole lot of weaknesses. I see this football team as a team that has a lot of guys who will be 6th round, 7th round, priority undrafted free agent, with a coach in Norvell who has taken, took Memphis to the Cotton Bowl, right? So certainly knows, I think, how to coach and how to score points. They would have to get the right team in the playoff, I think. I don't know if they're much deeper on the O-line than they ever were, and that's been a great job of improvement by them. Like, they're not amazing there, but they're pretty competent and they're much deeper, whereas they used to just be a complete liability. But I don't think they have a lot of guys in the O-line who are going to be like first, second rounders. Whereas Harbaugh's out there, or whoever from Michigan, kind of bragging to Feldman that they could have like 7 offensive linemen drafted in Michigan, right? Like, that's just a different level. Right. This team doesn't have that.
Okay. Let me also ask you about Clemson really quick, because it's a program that I have a hard time figuring out. I mean, they're kind of down from their highs with Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence as just kind of, not quarterbacks that you get all the time. And, had a really good season last year, but, they have a quarterback in Cade Klubnik that we haven't seen much of. They should be good on defense. But year one without Brent Venables didn't go particularly well. I feel like there's a lot of questions there. What do you think?
I kind of buy them this year. I look at it in some of the games that they struggled with last year. They were playing multiple true freshmen in the secondary due to injury. And now those guys are either going to be back to the bench because the starters are back, or are a year older and they're now more experienced than their guys who had pretty high recruiting pedigree. And Clemson does recruit a really high quality of player. I think they're very good at linebacker with Jeremiah Trotter, and I think they're exceptionally good at the defensive tackle position, despite who they lost.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I think Rook and Tyler Davis are very good. Peter Woods is a guy who was a real high 4-star for us, and I just think he's going to be extremely disruptive. The quickness there, all the guys at the All-American game were like Aaron Donald comparisons, and I'm not going there, but from a style perspective, I could see how he could wreak havoc within the ACC for sure with the undersized quickness there. I mean, they only lose one guy on the O-line who played at all for him last year. It's hard for me to think that they're worse. Receiver Joe Nagata really wasn't great for them last year. He had 500 yards. So I don't think they're worse there. And I think the backs are pretty good. I kind of like this Clemson team, and Shipley and Maffa are a nice combo. So and the offensive coaching isn't worse, right?
But I find it very interesting that you don't say it's worse. I think everyone, when you bring in a guy whose last name is Riley, you expect a really high ceiling, and I don't really see it from what he has done. At least this Riley brother has done, right?
That's fair. Yeah, I do think that he gets a lot of credit for the name and the fact that the run that TCU just had, for sure.
And then also you haven't addressed the quarterback position, which I'm also interested in for Clemson.
Yeah. So Clemson is one of these teams. Some teams I think you can derive some signal from what they do in the portal, right? Some teams will go out and address positions, trying to get guys. Whether or not they land them, at least they're offering guys. Clemson doesn't use the portal, with the exception of taking a guy who's basically a GA, So because they don't, it's hard for you to tell what they think about their position in terms of being able to read what they try to do in the offseason to fix it. Cade was a pretty successful guy in high school. I think he has all the tools. He was playing last year as a true freshman, and I think struggled in practice a lot from what I had heard in reports. And now they think he's better. That's kind of a really important part of measuring this team, though, is figuring out how much better. Because I don't know that they have studs at receiver. I think they're better than they were at receiver, just with a year older and hopefully some more health for some of these guys. But the fact that DJ transferred,
right? Yeah,
you that's probably read into that there. Some.
Yeah, of course.
I think so, but I don't know that Klubnik is like a total stud, and yet maybe he has some Heisman upside, right? Like if this offense totally clicks, there's a number of defenses here on the schedule that you could absolutely light up, and Clemson guys have come pretty close before. So in that offense, they're going to throw it a good bit.
Yeah. So that's a very good segue, because I do want to ask you about the Heisman. Caleb Williams is back as the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, and history suggests that he will not win it again. And I was looking at it this morning, Bud, and he's 5-1. Like it's almost like the contrarian choice is to pick the favorite this year, which is kind of hilarious in my mind a little bit. And I don't even know who to think about for the Heisman after that. So wanted to ask you what you thought about the Heisman and any betting implications.
So on Caleb, if he stays healthy, USC will be starting out 6-0, right? I mean, yeah, San Jose State,
right?
Yeah, so he's. I mean, is he going to be at 1,500 yards, maybe 1,800 yards by the time they start out 6-0, and then they go in undefeated to Notre Dame on a national primetime stage?
Yeah, I mean, almost definitely, right? I mean, who?
Yeah,
was Colorado going to pull it upset? I mean, yeah,
pretty unlikely, right?
The schedule is very backloaded.
So, assuming, I mean, granted, part of this is going to come down to how early do they pull him in some of these games. But I think it's a very safe bet that he's at 1,500 yards by then if he's healthy. And then down the stretch, so you're going to have a guy who is going to get all this number 1 overall draft pick status and hype, and then he's going to have several national games to showcase himself at Notre Dame. Then they come right back home and host Utah, a game which I have to think if Utah is having a decent season, we'll get the primetime treatment because of how those 2 games went last year. You get a little bit of a breather at Cal, and then you get what is probably an absolute shootout, again, in the Coliseum against Washington. These networks will love to put that on in either the primetime or like the big-time late-night window. And then at Oregon, and then host UCLA. So you're going to have a guy that starts out with just crazy stats, and then he's going to have a lot of opportunity, to showcase himself with what should be an improved defense. I kind of agree with you. Like, there's definitely a scenario in which he wins it. Other guys to think about for the Heisman, Carson Beck, certainly. He's a guy who I've heard has had some really good scrimmages for Georgia. We already mentioned Klubnik. I think you have to think about Ewers just because it'd be a bounce back story from what he did last year, in which he really struggled throwing the deep ball. They do have really good receivers to throw to there at Texas. I mean, almost anybody who is a quarterback of a team that could legitimately make the playoff is somebody you kind of have to think about in this era.
For sure. I mean, would you even, obviously Ohio State and Alabama are 2 programs that have the ability to make the college football playoff, even though I don't think either program knows who's going to start for them right now. I mean, would
Ohio State I would be interested in Heisman-wise. Alabama I would not. Just in terms of reading reports out of there, it seems like Bama is much more run focused this year, right? And I don't know if they're going to have the passing volume to win it. Ohio State certainly could.
Well, I mean, but so it kind of depends on who wins the job at Alabama, right?
Because that's certainly fair.
Because Milroe is more of a runner, right? And Buckner is a little bit more of a runner as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Buckner definitely runs it. Milroe runs it a ton. Even Simpson, I don't know that they're going to be dropping back 32 times a game.
And then at Ohio State, McCord, do you have any thoughts on him from what he's done on the recruiting circles?
I do think he's a pretty high level kid, but the Devin Brown also is a guy who was very productive in high school and was kind of a late riser for us. I know a lot of schools liked him late, and Ohio State ended up taking him. Just the quality of player you're throwing to there is so good. Do you worry about Marvin Harrison stealing votes from a potential potential guy? I don't know.
Yes, you do. I mean, you obviously do. I mean, the guy's
I think you have to.
Going to be a top 3 pick,
right?
And he's got
the famous, yeah.
He's got the name, right? So,
let me ask you a question on Michigan.
Yep,
if you don't mind,
of course.
So McCarthy last year, number 1 in the nation in quarterback rating on play action, number 55 quarterback rating without play action. In watching him every game, is that something you pick up on? And do you think he has the ability to improve in that area, like just the straight drop back stuff? Because I don't think it matters most games, but if they're behind the sticks or if they're in one of these real slugfest games,
Yeah. I think there's a lot of noise in that disparity.
Sure.
I think JJ McCarthy is a very good quarterback that has the potential to make a leap, but we just don't know. Like there's never been a question about his athletic talent. There's never been a question about his arm strength. I think watching him last year, I think he did pretty well with his accuracy. I think he made some really big improvements. But does he put it together to make it to the next level? There's certainly still a question about that, right? If he does, Michigan's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And an interesting thing is like he kind of needs to be awesome for them to live up to being number 2 in the preseason AP poll, right? So I've been actually making this case. I've been making this case all off season that this is like the most golden year for Michigan ever, simply because Ohio State and Alabama lost probably the best quarterbacks in program history. And I still believe that, right? I mean, so you look at the national title odds and Michigan's behind, I mean, clearly Georgia, let's put Georgia first, but they lost certainly the most successful in terms of winning quarterback in program history, right? And then Alabama and Ohio State lose their quarterbacks too. So of the top 4 teams, like Michigan has the best quarterback situation. But then when you see them at second in all the preseason AP polls, I mean, I'm actually debating making them one of my overrated teams because that, that's, I mean, it's just, you're basically saying you have to make it to the championship game, which is possible, but not probable for Michigan.
Right. So, and yet at the same time, I do feel they're a very high floor team due to the quality of player at almost every position.
Sure. Yeah. I would agree with that. It's never like right now, I would make Michigan a very small favorite against Ohio State.
Same.
I don't think, Penn State is not a gimme. Obviously, it depends on a very talented program. Actually, I think a very underrated program, especially when you hear just the chatter about. I think a lot of people I talk to, and actually a lot of people I talk to that know a lot about college football, don't like James Franklin. And I don't know. I see a very good football program that, as living here in Ann Arbor, I don't like to play them. Yeah, sure, it went really well last year, but. So yeah, I mean, the hype machine is in full swing here in Ann Arbor, and yeah, I think there's a lot of question marks. I mean, but obviously that's what makes college football fun,
for sure. No, that I agree with you on that. Penn State also brings up a matchup question to where I think a lot of these power ratings are very, very good now overall, and you can find edge if you understand matchups on stuff, right? So. Mm-hmm. Michigan Penn State last year was close for a while on the scoreboard. I don't think it was actually super close if you were watching it on a down-to-down basis.
It wasn't.
Right? That there are certain styles that just bother teams, right? I mean, you may be a team that likes to run, this play on offense, and it just so happens that what you do, that what the opponent does defensively, it's just that's kind of a known weakness of their schedule. So if you happen to just be really good at the thing that they are bad at doing, then you're going to play to a different number than the power ratings suggest. And I think that's kind of what happened last year with Michigan's offense and Penn State's defense.
So Penn State wasn't ready for what, the ground game?
I feel like they were able to get movement at the point of attack, whereas Penn State's a little more kind of lighter, more attacking, super athletic, very good at chasing defense, which I think traditionally is why they play Ohio State pretty well. Although they don't usually win, but they have played them well at times, whereas Michigan's more just come right at you, I think. And Michigan also, I think they definitely exploit you if you're undisciplined in terms of your run fits. And Penn State's kind of like chaos with run fits. So, I mean, I think that's why they hit some of those big runs.
Yeah, for sure. We will see. Just one last thought about Michigan. I mean, I really do hope they let JJ cook early in the season. Because I think that can only benefit them when things get way more difficult. And obviously, it's pretty fluky to throw 2 pick sixes against TCU. I don't think that happens again. Although, I mean, that was a massive opportunity for them to advance and lose to Georgia in the championship game.
That is, I don't think they were going to beat Georgia if they had played.
All right, Bud. Last question. Give us a surprising team for the 2023 college football season.
Yeah. So somebody's got to win some games. I think I already gave you Oklahoma State, so let's scratch them. But I do think they could be decent. I sort of think BYU might be fine. I think BYU can block. They seem to be fairly excited about Keaton Slovis there, which maybe that's just media reports. And while I don't love some of the transfers BYU took, I do think that they were playing just really pretty sketchy backups last year at times. And so that I have a hard time believing their defense is worse. The head coach there took over defensive play calling duties and changed some things around. So I could see BYU being a little bit better in the Big 12 to open the year than people think.
Interesting. Yeah, Keaton Slovis is fascinating to me, right? Because, I mean, I think, God, was this time a year ago or this time 2 years ago that he was projected as a first-round NFL pick? And that simply hasn't come about. I mean, still, there's a reason we thought that at one point, right? And so can he make that happen this year? So what's their ceiling?
I think BYU's ceiling is probably 8-4, maybe. If just kind of max health, a couple good bounces, they play to their talent level. The defense actually really plays up. I mean, they're big dogs confidently at TCU, and at Texas. And then I think that they are dogs at home to Texas Tech, and they're definitely dogs at Arkansas. Timing wise, even though I'm high on Oklahoma State, is it crazy to think that Oklahoma State kind of falls apart again down the stretch? Could Gundy lose that team? That's the final game they have, and that's after Oklahoma State plays Bedlam. They also get Iowa State late in the year, which with the some of the suspension stuff, who knows how long that lasts, but that's a team that could fall apart. And they also get West Virginia late, and that's a team that easily could have a fired head coach situation by then. So that's a squad that I could see going above its win total. Getting Cincinnati early probably helps there, and they have a pretty soft start with Sam Houston and Southern Utah to incorporate some of these new transfers in.
Awesome. Bud Elliott, thank you so much for your time during this busy college football preseason. Please let everyone know where they can find all your good work.
Yeah, Ed, just hit me up, guys, on Twitter at BudElliott3. I got the link tree there, so it'll take you to my work at CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports and the Cover 3 podcast.
Awesome, and we should probably let everyone know where to get your betting emails, because that's probably going to be a big interest.
For sure. Yeah, just hit the link tree there, and it's got a little thing to fill out, and then I'll just add you guys to it, and it's a fun time in the off season.
Awesome. Bud, thank you so much for your time. My name is Ed Fang, your host for the Football Analytics Show. I really hope you enjoyed that episode with Bud Elliott. He just knows so much about college football, and I'm really glad he was able to join me on the show. If you notice in the intro clip, I talked about Dante Moore, the quarterback at UCLA. Bud has always been really insightful about identifying quarterbacks that can do really well. On his last appearance, he talked about Bryce Young and just how good a quarterback he was despite his stature, and that turned out to be pretty good. If you're betting on college football, you really need to follow everything that Bud is doing. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting email newsletter, really a football betting newsletter at this time of year. You'll get my curated list of tips and analytics every Saturday and 5 Nugget Saturday. And also you'll get a lot of my preview series over the next month. To check that out, go to thepowerrank.com. Also, just as a reminder, I will be having the preview series on this podcast. I'm just trying to make it easier for you to consume my content, whether you want to read it or whether you want to listen to it. Part of that will start next week on the Football Analytics Show. Once again, my name is Ed Fang. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. I will talk to you soon.